All right, you guys voted for this video here. It is Adam and Stitch talking to Sam Seder. I'm just curious about what's going on here. Let me scroll down. I think this is a live stream. Yeah, so they just talked to him about politics and culture, but it looks like it could be kind of interesting. They talk about misinformation, defining whiteness. Sam thinks everyone has an unconscious bias. Can America ever be colorblind? Et cetera, et cetera. Very interesting. I mean, these are topics I'm actually interested in, so let's get going.
Hey now, it's your boy, PSA Sitch, here with another Tuesday show with everyone's favorite.
Sam Seder seems to kind of be in the limelight right now. He seems to have a little bit of clout, you know, but okay.
MMT advocate, Adam Friend.
How dare you? Why you gotta get the chat mad at me from the get-go? Sitch? That's so unfair.
Because you and Sam were bonding over your love of MMT before the stream started.
You don't look. That was secret. That was supposed to be between me and Sam. Okay. Sam has actually interviewed Stephanie Kelton. I think you said 5 or 6 times. So that's props to you.
I think, yeah, at least. And I also just looked up Lilo and Stitch, which came out in 2002. I did not.
Lilo and Stitch. What is the matter with you? It's Lilo.
I didn't see it, and frankly, I have never. I don't think ever heard of it until you just said.
Have you heard of? Have you never heard of Lilo and Stitch?
I mean, it is.
That's racist. To not have heard of Lilo and Stitch is a racist. Okay, you can't do that. Lilo and Stitch. This guy says
something I have done on purpose, but
damn.
I'm reminded on a daily basis by people who I work with that
you think Sam looks like Adam's dad? Yeah, I guess he could be.
No awareness of anything that's happened in culture for decades. So that is not by design. I don't know what happened.
Okay.
My kids. I don't know.
We probably should have checked this before we began, but do you have a mic there? Or are you on is that your computer audio coming through?
I think it is my built-in microphone. Should I try?
Well, no, if that's all you have. The audio seems fine, but I didn't know. Sometimes people have a better mic and they just...
Okay.
You know, I think I...
No. It's fine. It's fine.
You talked for like 5 minutes beforehand. Why didn't we do any of this?
Yeah, I thought if there was to be a problem, you would have said that there was a problem. Adam.
Well, no. It's good. It's good. Don't worry about it.
I'm not the first guest you've had on, am I?
No.
I'm sure.
No, never.
I know. Okay. There you go. Yeah, I know. You know what? My headphone microphones are not showing up. I had a microphone, but I had a feeling my kid stole it.
No, it's okay. Sounds
Don't
fine.
worry about it. I just want to say, before we start, I want to tell our audience, we're only talking to Sam for like an hour or a little bit more. So if you send in any questions that you want us to ask Sam, there's a good chance we won't get to them. So I'm just letting you guys know.
All right, thank you.
Sorry about that, folks.
Don't worry about it.
That's okay.
Okay, so what I want to talk about today, and you did give me permission to go hard on you. Just want everyone to know.
Please, yes. No, I...
Sounds
yes,
a little
sure, of course.
kinky.
So I'm gonna need a little bit of a setup here to give context to what I want to talk about. What I want to talk about, which could be a little contentious or uncomfortable, is that I want to talk about spreading misinformation. And as a content creator, me and Adam, we do feel strongly about spreading misinformation.
I love it. I love spreading misinformation. It's my favorite. So they call that disinformation because it's on purpose.
Do that, and a lot of our show revolves around going over and critiquing what we perceive to be as misinformation. And I do feel like some of the stories that you've covered about these anti-CRT bills, you've got some key elements of them incorrect.
Okay.
And the one I want to talk about, or one of the ones I want to talk about, was recently did a video called Republicans Say 1921 Tulsa Race Massacre Lessons Shouldn't Discuss Racism. And in the video, we see someone ask the school superintendent for Oklahoma how schools could teach something like the Tulsa Race Massacre without running afoul the anti-CRT bill. And and instead of, you don't show the full answer or the full interaction that the superintendent gives. You played only the second part, the second half of his answer, kind of out of context. And then using that out of context clip, you and your co-host jumped to what I would categorize as unfair conclusions about this guy's position, about the positions of the government of Oklahoma. Because in the first part of the guy's answer, the superintendent, he says that Oklahoma should 100% teach the Tulsa Race Massacre. He says that the only way for American children to continue to make America the best country in the world is to learn from the mistakes of the past, that children should have a very clear, direct understanding of these events. He specifically says he doesn't want to hide any part of U.S. history.
I'm not like super educated on specifically what they're talking about, so it's probably going to be a little more listening.
But that answer wasn't played, in your guys' show. And he only played the second part of his answer where he says he would never tell a kid that they are inherently racist because of the kid's skin color.
I mean, I agree with that fundamentally. Like, you shouldn't tell any, like, listen, I understand that white people, like, benefit from the system and all that. I get it. generally speaking, right? I think rich people benefit from the system more than anything else, but generally speaking, I agree with that, of course, right? But but white people shouldn't be told that like they're the problem and fundamentally. So yeah, I mean, I agree with that.
And he continues to say that you can teach about these historical incidences as long as you don't blame the behavior on immutable characteristics.
Interesting. So as long as you don't blame the behavior on whiteness. Okay. That might be actually hard to do, though, depending on how you're having the conversation. Like, okay, this is how I would have the conversation. Like, hey, back then, like, there was like racism. White people felt that they were superior in some capacity. I mean, you could probably bring up that there was like just generally like different types of I mean, I know there was generally different types of tribalism in general, and it's not like an immutable white characteristic to engage in tribalism, of course. Okay. This is things that happened like all over the place. Like we know that it's not like just even whiteness either, because we know that there were other factors like in different cultures too, like when England got fucking nayd by the Vikings and stuff too. But like they used that whiteness to claim superiority. Like, could you teach that? I guess that would be my question. Are you able to teach that? Because maybe that could be perceived as saying white people are bad in some capacity. But like that seems like the right way to teach that particular topic, right? The video's playing. What's happening right now? Oh, I have it muted on accident. How'd that happen?
From just that clip,
okay.
You accused him of denying the existence of white supremacy, the KKK, the racial motivations behind the Tulsa Race Massacre. You refer to him in the state of Oklahoma as propagating lost causism, which is the idea of casting slave owners as benevolent, downplaying the horrors of slavery, and saying the Civil War wasn't about slavery. You compared his statement and the anti-CRT bill to being similar to the conditions that caused the Tulsa Race Massacre in the first place. You referred to this anti-CRT legislation as upholding the Confederacy. You said he and the state were trying to remove the fact that the Tulsa Race Massacre was motivated by race and racism, and you all agreed to call him a white supremacist. So I guess what I'm confused about is how, from his answer, you derived all these conclusions.
Obviously, I don't have all the I don't even necessarily recall the video, but I'll stipulate everything you've said. Would you just repeat to me the last thing he said about immutable characteristics?
I can read you his direct thing if you want me to.
Yeah, just repeat what you had just told me in that setup.
Okay, well, what I told you was that he said, the way I described it was, he said you can teach about historical incidences as long as you don't blame the behavior on immutable characteristics.
Okay.
Yeah.
So what do you think he's talking about when he says blame the behavior of...
Like blame the behavior on being white. I don't think that the behavior is because they're white. I think that people are tribalists, and unfortunately, like white people happen to be the dominating, tribe in some capacities and enacted some like horrible things, But like at the very least, my real question is: my real question would be: are you able to teach that like white supremacy was being pushed? Because that's what I mean. Because I mean that could be interpreted in different ways if you're not even allowed to bring that. And I think it's a good question. If you're not even allowed to bring up like the concept of white supremacy, then like it seems really stupid to talk about the topic. So that makes sense to ask that question, and like I would want to explore that, of course. But yeah, I mean, I agree with his answer. Then again, he could be lying with his answer, but I mean, we could just really take him on face value what he says, right?
The Tulsa massacre.
He's saying that what I interpreted what he was saying, because the question asked was, how does teaching the Tulsa Race Massacre...
I know that, but I'm saying like when he says...
I'm trying to answer the question.
Okay.
He's, because the person says, how does teaching this incident not run afoul of the CRT or the anti-CRT legislation? And his answer is that he's saying that he would never teach a child that the child is inherently racist because of their skin color.
No, but that's not what he said. What he said was, will you just read the quote?
He said, I would never tell a kid that because of your race, because of the color of your skin or your gender or anything like that you are less of a person or inherently racist.
Yeah, there's nothing wrong with that.
That doesn't
the next one about
doesn't mean you don't judge the actions of individuals. You can absolutely do that. Historically, you should. This was right. This was wrong. They did this for this reason. But to say...
Yeah, as long as you can say that the reason was because they were white. Like, it's not an immutable white characteristic to be bad, but people were using their whiteness as a weapon to say we are better than you. And if you can... Like, and you may not be able to teach that based on this whatever legislation. I don't know. I don't know anything about it. That's a reasonable question to ask, of course. So, like, that would be where I'd push. I'd be like, okay, maybe you'd feel like that doesn't answer the question. In a satisfactory way. That's reasonable to say.
It was inherent in that because of their skin is where I say that is critical race theory. You're saying that race defines a person. I reject that. So I would say to you to be judgmental of the issue, of the action, of the content of the character, of the individual, absolutely. But let's not tie it into his skin color and say the skin color determines that.
Yeah, so that to me like makes me feel like you're not really allowed to teach that like that whiteness was a factor. And again, it's not an immutable white characteristic, but like white people did use it as a factor to say like we're better than you. So like to me, I would be like, oh, that sounds a little sketchy. Are we able to say that like people use the whiteness to go kill other people or attack other people? Because that seems, I wouldn't say that he's a literal like white nationalist or anything. I would just say like your answer just seems a little bit vague, and I'm not like satisfied with it.
Okay, so the idea that the Oklahoma massacre was simply a function of some bad individuals, to me, is absurd.
Yeah.
It is contrary to historical context. I mean, let's be clear. The Oklahoma massacre was not the only massacre that took place in the post-Reconstruction years. There were dozens. There were political coups. There were assassinations. They were white people taking out black political people and black wealth. And the idea that this was simply a function of individuals, but not a function of an ideology that came out of in the wake of the Civil War is just, I'm sorry, it's ludicrous. And just I think
one of the problems is it doesn't sound like that guy had said any of this explicitly, but he could have meant it like implicitly, right? Like that's what it would be where it comes from. But I don't think that it probably isn't effective to be so hyperbolic in your like, your no, you're saying no to what he's saying. Because that might be where it lies. Sam might be right. The guy might be trying to say that you can't teach anything to do with race in any capacity, even though people use white supremacy to be destructive. But being hyperbolic might not have helped the argument.
The idea that this is going to be, you cannot consider the question of race, which I guess is the immutable characteristic that he's referring to, right? That race plays no part in white supremacy is a total denialism. I mean, and look, let me be clear. Like, I think white supremacy is a practice that we all largely in this society engage in, including black people.
Do you really think that? That's interesting. I don't know if I think that. I'm sure he'll
and because it's something that has been so ingrained into the society, into the fabric of our society, that it is, it's almost like, in many respects, it's involuntary. There are, to be sure, there's a lot of white supremacy that is much more voluntary and much more you're aware of for some people. But broadly speaking, we make choices every day that are a function of white supremacy, that are a function.
Like what? Like what? I mean, I'm sure he's going to go into it, but like what decision do people make that's like an active function of white supremacy? Like what cereal I buy? I mean, I don't know.
White supremacy. The idea that the Oklahoma race massacres was not a function of the whiteness and the blackness of the people involved. I'm sorry, it's just, in my mind, it's complete denialism. Yeah. Now, I don't know, I don't know, remember the exact context of the guy. I don't remember the guy whatsoever. And but that view, in my mind, is both a white supremacist view, which, again, I believe that white supremacy is something that we can practice unconsciously.
Right.
And I believe that subscribing to that view is certainly what ultimately leads to more egregious acts of racism. And it also is, I think it is completely consistent with the impetus behind the lost cause. I think, frankly, the whole assault on CRT is also denial of systemic racism. I mean, it is also, I think, like...
Yeah, it definitely is an aspect of denial of systemic racism. However, I will also say that there are some of the narratives go a little too far in, like, hating white people. Like, you see it online when you hear people... This is the thing. And... Sorry, my fucking threats. A lot of it centralizes around you can't be racist to white people. Right? I understand systemically that you really can't be. I understand that. But the problem is that I've never heard someone say you can't be racist to white people unless it's specifically them referring to being hateful to white people. Right? People be like, they'll say something hateful, and then they'll say you can't be racist to white people as a justifier. And it's like, okay, so what is the point of you saying that? Are you trying to have a systemic conversation, or are you just justifying bullying? Right? Because even if you don't think you could be racist to white people, which you can, but even if you don't think so, you would still be able to be prejudiced to white people, which is not a good thing. And so that's one of the problems. And like that, some people look at that and they're like, oh, I feel like, you know, people are trying to attack us as for being white. I didn't create the system that was destructive to people. Like, why are people, you know, being rude to me? I get that sentiment as a white man, as a white victim. No, but I understand that sentiment.
A fictionalized version of what CRT in fact is. And I would also say that like the goal of these laws is in my mind twofold. It is one, to make it so that people who would teach about questions of race to self-censor themselves, because these things are written in such a vague manner. And particularly in the case of like Florida, where you have empowered people, and I think the Oklahoma law is modeled after this. You empower people to sue a school district. They're going to err on the side of not bumping up against that law, because
that makes sense. See, this part makes like rational sense. Like if you're able to sue people, sue this like the school for teaching something, it's going to make the school much, even if it's ambiguous, it's going to make the school less likely to teach that thing. And so if his argument's like, yeah, listen, this law seems so ambiguous, you may not be able to bring up the white supremacy element to it, and you know that might make the teachers not want to talk about it, just to get rid of, because from a budgeting perspective, if the school can get sued for this kind of shit, you know, it's probably not going to, you know, it's going to cause us to have to waste so much money in different funds that we're not going to teach this topic. That I get that topic. That makes sense, is what he's saying.
Because it's so costly for them.
Yeah,
and it's
sure.
cheaper for them to avoid anything that is even remotely close to
Which
that.
makes sense to me.
And
sure.
it's the same thing with abortion bans. That's why you have doctors saying like, I'm not going to perform an abortion on an ectopic pregnancy because I'm not going to lose my license and go to jail. And so that type of like ambiguity around the law is not a bug, but rather a feature of that law. And then I would also say that on top of that being the purpose of the law, it is, and I think we're seeing this in Florida, which has been the pioneer in this stuff, that the next step is a beginning to proffer more, I would say, racism denial, like in the form of the attempt to rewrite the curriculum to say that slavery provided personal benefits for the enslaved. So yeah, I mean, I don't remember the specifics of the video.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I agree with this. It's so interesting because like that is obviously like a dumb thing to teach, right? That like slaves, benefited in some capacity. Some people have pointed out like, yeah, but some people have been far. The point of that to me, from Florida, which is a state that doesn't really believe in systemic racism, is to be a downplay of slavery. Now, some people are like, no, but black people learned a lot of things like through that. Like they learned how to be tough, and they can speak to the black excellence. And you're right, it could. Do you think Florida was trying to speak to some form of black excellence, or do you think that Florida is trying to downplay racism and slavery? Right? You know where slaves. You know where else they could have learned really good characteristics? Not being slaves. You know what I mean? Like you could. So I don't think that the intention of it is to fucking Jesus Christ. I don't think that the intention of it was to be some kind of like powerful message that black people rose above slavery. I really do think that was meant to be a downplay of what happened. When you see again like Matt Walsh saying that like slavery was kind of a good thing, it's just like it seems so unnecessary.
You're talking about, but largely based on his comments, regardless of what he's saying to mitigate that, I think that his understanding of both that law and of the Oklahoma massacre is completely consistent with white supremacy.
I think you misinterpret what he was saying.
I think you misinterpret what he's saying. That's we're having a disagreement about.
Right. Well, I understand. Okay. Well, we'll see. Because I think so. My understanding of what he was saying, he didn't say anything that like you can't teach that the Tulsa Race Massacre was motivated by racism or animosity towards black people. Because the first sentence he says is, "I would never tell a kid that because of your race, because of the color of your skin, that you are less of a person or inherently racist." Now you can disagree with how he defines CRT, but in the anti-CRT bill, it says specifically that you can't teach that someone is inherently racist because of their skin color. And so he's saying that's the element that you shouldn't teach. He's not saying you can't teach that the people involved in the Tulsa Race Massacre were motivated by racism.
I mean, can you put up his full quote? Because I wasn't responding to that part, obviously. I was responding to the second half that you said something like that the events were not a function of some immutable characteristics.
He said, I would never tell the kid that because of your race, because of the color of your skin or your gender or anything like that, that you were less of a person or inherently racist. That doesn't mean that you don't judge the actions of individuals. You can absolutely do that. Historically, you should. This was right, this was wrong, they did this for this reason. But to say it was inherent, this is where I see it's key. But to say it was inherent in that because of their skin is where I say that is critical race theory.
I will tell you.
Yeah, I mean, like I think I side more with Sam Seder here. It's so ambiguous. Like you would need him to explicitly say, like, hey, can we teach that white supremacy was a big driving factor in this scenario? That's the question that needs to be asked. It's such a vague answer that it's like hard, you know, people are going to debate over the specifics, and it's really hard to tell what like his intentions are necessarily. You know, and so I think that's what I think this is the point of why he was so ambiguous, is possibly to try to drive this type of discourse to be so like ambiguous and like potentially a non-answer. You know?
That had those people who committed who flew the planes that bombed the wealthy neighborhood, the black wealthy neighborhood in Oklahoma, had they been black, they would not have done that. I think we can all,
that's true.
I think we can all agree on that, right?
Sam, I don't think either one of us are disputing that those people were racist as fuck, and that we should be able to teach that. But the thing is, though, if people are saying because those people were racist in the past that you are in fact racist, or that any particular race is inherently racist as some sort of like biological determinism, that's the problem.
Well, first off, I don't think CRT in any way whatsoever teaches that because people were racist in the past, they are inherently racist now.
It probably doesn't, but that seems to be some of the public sentiment, and I think that's why some people feel that way.
CRT doesn't even come remotely close to teaching anything like that.
Well, kind of does, but we can talk about something else.
But not really. No, actually, no.
That's what you meant when you said we're all engaged in white supremacy, because the idea is that since our society was set up,
that's actually not critical race theories either. Critical race.
Well, I mean, we are engaged in white supremacy, but that doesn't mean it's an immutable white characteristic. I just think it means that like white people, like every race of people, are at the same level of shitty, and we just happen to win. Like, I don't think it was anything to do with us being better. I think maybe it was better like resources or something like that. And that was pretty much it. You know, but I don't think that saying white supremacy means that like white people in general are bad, or it shouldn't. And if some people, and there are some people who interpret it that way to be hateful to white people, which is obviously wrong. So maybe that's what they're getting at with that.
Theories is that there are institutions and functions of society that are set up that are a function of racism, in the sense that there's diminished. So, for example.
It's like the same thing as like when I went to Pollo Campero the other day to get some chicken, which was really good. But it's a very Hispanic restaurant. Everybody's like looking at me, and I'm pretty sure, even though I was like I was there and I did an online order and my order should have been ready, like they gave me my food like after a bunch of other people. They didn't just prepare my meal. They took like 3 people afterwards. I went on the line, and then after I got on the line, you know, I was just like, hey, like, what's up, dude? Like, I did an online order. They're like, oh, okay. And then they just didn't put it together or anything. And then, you know, 10 minutes later, you know, a bunch of people that had just walked in had gotten their orders fulfilled. I didn't care, because I was like, all right, whatever, the food's good. But that's basically, that is Pollo Campero supremacy, if you ask me. Now just imagine that, but with like not just food stuff that was 10 minutes of an inconvenience, and like denial of jobs. You know, a little bit, just slightly, being a little worse. Just a little worse, you know what I mean? That's what we're talking about here, right?
It is statistically far more likely that your neighborhood, if you are black, will be 10 to 20 degrees hotter.
That's based.
In the summer, in the peak of the summer.
What does that mean? Is that true? Is that just because? Why? What? Okay.
Now, do you know why that is?
I don't know. Maybe white people took up all the cold areas, because we don't do good in the heat, bro. Let's just be honest. All right, I'm not built for the heat. I'm a Germanic person. All right, I'm built for the snow. All right.
Well, if you are black,
or maybe it's just hotter in the city because a lot of black people tend to be in the city. You know.
It would be significantly more likely that your neighborhood is actually hotter.
The question though is
and
that
the reason, no,
I'm curious about the answer here. I know that they want to push them though a little bit because they only have an hour with them. But
the reason is because there are less trees that are planted in urban areas. There are less trees planted.
I feel like that's not true. I feel like it's more to do with, I mean, there are less trees, but I feel like it has more to do with how crowded buildings are, and that makes things hotter. Because there's not like a lot of air flow. I feel like it has nothing to do with trees, though. Like, what the fuck?
In neighborhoods where there are black people.
Okay.
That's just a fact. And the reason why that is
maybe it's because black women are hotter. You know what I'm saying?
Because there's less political power and less money in those neighborhoods. This is just a fact. I mean, this is a measurable.
This just seems like a weird. This seems like this is the worst. If I was trying to teach people systemic racism, I probably wouldn't have gone with this. I wouldn't have led with this one. I wouldn't have led with there's less trees in the city, so it's hotter. I feel like there's more buildings in the city, which means there's less airflow. There's more people in the city, which means more combined heat. You know what I mean? Like, I feel like that has to do with population density more than it has to do with the lack of how many fucking trees there are. But I mean, maybe it's all connected. I don't know.
Fact.
I think we should stick to the point that we want.
Okay, well,
we should stick to the point of the bill, because
we
I don't
could have a
dispute any.
protracted.
I don't dispute anything that you're saying.
Stop. Okay, we could have a protracted conversation. Maybe we would in the future. I'd be interested to have this about what CRT is, because I've actually read way too much about CRT and read too much academic literature on CRT. But instead of debating that, the thing that I want to talk about with this is that, you know, you can disagree with Oklahoma or this guy's interpretation of how they define CRT, but that would be different than saying, well, they're claiming you can't teach that the Tulsa Race Massacre.
Concrete absorbs heat. That makes sense too. Because if concrete absorbs heat, that means there's going to be more heat that's staying in the ground, right? Right? Does that make sense? Am I making any sense here?
Is motivated by racists, which when I'm looking at his words, he's not saying that. And when I look at the law, it doesn't appear to say anything like that either.
I mean, in the words that you just said to me, that this actions was not a function of an immutable characteristic. That to me says these people did not attack that neighborhood in Oklahoma because the people were black, and these people did not attack and the attackers did not do so.
There's a confusion. There's a confusion going on here, Sam. You're talking about the immutable characteristics of the blacks, but I think he's talking about the immutable characteristics of the whites being racist. So if you're saying that the people who attacked have an immutable characteristic of racism, and that's why they attacked, you are also saying that people today who are white have this same immutable characteristic of being racist. That's the problem.
Yeah, I think the problem is that, like, it was said so ambiguous that we don't really know what it's more a matter of interpretation from the person who said it originally. I
think that attack would not have happened if those attackers were not white.
So do you think white people have an immutable characteristic of racism?
Yeah, I think everybody does, honestly. I think everybody has an immutable characteristic of tribalism.
Within the context of our society? Yeah, I think that there is. Well, I don't know that is. I think no. That wouldn't be considered. The question isn't whether the racism is immutable.
That wouldn't be considered immutable. Isn't a mutable characteristic something you can't change? Immutable definition. Unchanging over time or unable to be changed. Like, yeah, so if you think it's a social quality, then it's not an immutable characteristic because it cannot be changed.
The question is whether the whiteness is immutable.
Well, what is
in the
whiteness?
sense that? Well, in the sense that I mean, I'm using the way that this guy is talking about it.
I have no idea.
I don't believe that this guy thinks that race is a social construct. I mean, I'm talking about the way that he is using in this context. He is talking about race. When he says a mutable characteristic is race, okay. And I would say that yes, I think that it is inherent in our society. And like I say, I think both black and white people share in some function of white supremacy. But I think the whiteness of those people was the primary motivating factor in their attacking.
What do you mean by whiteness?
Like, yeah, the fact that they were white and the other people were black was their primary motivator, because they, like, sure, but I don't, like, that's not immutable, is it? I mean,
how are you defining whiteness?
In the context of people in 1921?
Yeah, their behavior is being motivated by whiteness.
Well, no, not in the. I think the key thing is, to be clear, you don't believe. I'm assuming you don't believe that, not like whiteness, like what does whiteness mean? But you don't believe that just because someone is white, that means that they're inherently racist, right?
No, I don't think. Well, I mean, look, I happen to think, no, not inherently. I mean,
okay, there's the answer.
I'm not sure what you mean by necessarily inherently.
It's an immutable characteristic that you're born with, in the same way that you're born with skin color.
Well, you're saying no, that racism is an immutable characteristic. Right. And I'm not saying that.
Okay.
I know, that's what I'm trying to clear up.
I'm not saying that racism is immutable.
Right.
Sam is confusing the fuck out of me.
That's what the guy who's responding to this is. That's what he's talking about. He's saying that you can't teach that racism is immutable.
No, read
The beach was a chill vibe after 6. I just not good at the beach, man. I just do not like the beach.
the quote back to me again, please.
I would never tell a kid that because of your race, because
No,
of
I know
the
that
color
part,
of
but
your
go
skin.
go
Well, wait,
to
but
where
do
he's
you
talking about
understand?
the Oklahoma.
Okay,
Yeah, no,
but
I understand.
do you understand
what
the
he's
first
saying.
sentence?
Bro, Sam, all literally Sam has to say is like, yeah, you know what? I think that the guy was being intentionally vague, and I don't think he was answering the question. And so I feel like it's possible, and he did a good job half of this. I think it's possible that because it's so vague, that schools will stay away from teaching this particular topic in the right way because they're afraid of getting like litigation and like wasting resources. So they're just not going to teach it correctly. I think that's a perfectly reasonable answer. You know, I don't know what we're going on about fucking trees and shit. I feel like that's kind of we're getting lost inside of the sauce, you know.
Just saying what I'm saying.
That that the color of your skin dictates whether you are racist or not.
Yes.
Yeah, I don't think that's a helpful thing to teach people.
No, but you understand. I understand, but you understand that that's what he's saying in the first sentence, right?
I believe so. But let's go. I mean, can you pop up the quote on the screen?
I can send it to Adam. I guess.
Yes.
I don't know how to do this.
Can you put it in like some type of chat or something?
Yeah, put it in the side chat.
Yeah, actually, yeah, I can just copy and
But
paste it.
I would also say, like, and I'm happy to continue to have this conversation, but the idea that we could be talking about this for 25 minutes and you say that it's misinformation, what is clearly like we have different interpretations.
No,
of what this
that
guy
part's
said.
true.
The beginning of the clip is crystal clear, though, Sam. It's
I don't-
undeniable.
No, I agree that there can be different interpretations.
what
yeah.
he's saying. So, Sitch, do you have the transcript from the beginning of the video?
I've literally been denying your interpretation of what he's saying for 20 minutes, and now you're telling me it's undeniable.
Well, but it's deniable in the
I guess
portion of
that's
the clip
fair.
that you played, obviously, because that portion of the clip is kind of, you can interpret multiple different ways. But in the beginning of the clip, when the guy first asked the question, he says specifically that you can teach the Tulsa race riot, you can teach about slavery, you can teach about slavery being the worst thing ever.
Okay. But to say it was inherent in that because of their skin is where I say that is critical race theory. You're saying that race defines a person. I reject it. So I would say, okay. Okay, I'm sorry.
Very
Now, which
productive
part
conversation.
Did, we play
That's the part you played.
this whole thing.
Yeah.
Do you have the beginning
I have
context?
the part that you didn't. Yeah, I can.
Yeah, bring that up.
Okay.
That's the
Thank
part
you.
that's undeniable.
Okay, well let me.
Message
Well,
is
but no,
true.
but there's no. You can't accuse me of using one part of what he says and generalizing on that, and then saying that because he said something that mitigates that, then that is the one that is holding.
Well, but as a
I'm suggesting the whole question.
Well, as a journalist, you could. Well, I think the bigger issue is that like he didn't bring it all up at once. He only played half of the statement. And so if you played the whole statement and said like, "Hey, here's my critique on this," then you could, but like then you could have an argument. But to not put it out there in general, I think can be misleading, right? That's a reasonable. Just die, bro. What the fuck?
Question of whether this guy is fudging around the genuine implications of that Oklahoma attack.
Look, if
on
he's
black wealth.
if he's fudging around, Sam, that's totally within your realm to call him out for it. But if there are two clips, if there's a clip that you can interpret the way that you interpret it, and then there's another clip where it's crystal clear that your interpretation is incorrect, as a journalist, don't you owe it to your
I don't think
audience
it's
to
crystal
basically
clear.
correct the record?
I mean, someone asked me last night if I consider myself a journalist, and I don't really. I think there are sometimes I do journalism and I interview people, but in the main, no.
Oh, I hate this argument. I just I'm not really a journalist. It's like, okay, I what is that for? Like you're covering your legal basis. It doesn't matter whether you're a journalist or not. You should try not to be even unintentionally deceptive in your shit.
I'm not. I do a podcast and a YouTube.
Well,
But anyways, that's not the point.
Yeah, those are new like social. There are people. There are journalists all over the fucking place doing podcasts on YouTube. What the hell are you talking about?
We get
Let me
accused.
do this. Okay.
the fuck?
Which
There we go.
which of these three clips here that you posted here was the ones that we talked about?
Bro,
The first thing that I posted was the thing that you played.
Okay.
That's what we're gonna-
Okay. So thank you. I'm sorry to address that part. I would never tell a kid that because of your race, because of the color of your skin or your gender, or anything like that you're less of a person or inherently racist. That's very good of it. That doesn't mean you don't judge the actions of individuals. Now, to look at the Oklahoma race riot as an action of individuals is to fundamentally miss the key dynamic that's going on there. This was not just random individuals. They were organizing around a principle.
No,
That
but
is,
nobody's
we're
doing
not
that.
going to we're not going to allow black people to accrue wealth and political power. That's what they're doing.
That is
what they're
fine.
doing. And they are saying, and let's be clear, they are saying black people as distinct from them as white people.
Like I said, he says in the very beginning that you can teach the darker parts of American history that America has these racist
But
roots.
then he is literally, his whole argument is that doesn't mean you don't judge the actions of individuals. And the point is,
this is where I think the misconfusion is coming from. So the guy asked the question twice. He asked, "How can you teach about the Tulsa Race Massacre without running afoul of the CRT bill?" That's the context. In the first answer, he says you can teach all about the Tulsa Race Massacre, the good, bad, and ugly, blah 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 blah. And the guy asked again. He says, "Follow up. How does this not run afoul of the CRT bill?" And that's why he says, "Oh, I'm sorry I didn't address that." And so when he says, "I would never tell a kid because of the color of his skin that you're inherently racist," he's saying that is the part that runs afoul of the CRT bill, is teaching that concept. And he's saying that you can teach the Tulsa Race Massacre without teaching that specific concept, and that's why it doesn't run afoul of the CRT bill. That's the context of this interaction.
Since you can't just
very
read
clear.
the first part of what he said.
Which is stop.
what's it?
No, what were you gonna say?
I'm reading. I'm reading the thing that you said.
Okay, I can read it.
Yeah, read it, Sitch.
The first thing. So
No,
someone.
the
when
second
person,
thing.
Yeah, I know. When the person asked him originally about this, he says, "We wrote at the very beginning, all Oklahoma standards have to be taught. This is not an end around to say we're not going to teach the Tulsa Race Massacre. That is absolutely not the intention. It was verbatim in the bill to say all these standards have to be taught. I believe our kids have to know all of our history, the good, the bad, and the ugly. I believe this is absolutely the greatest country in the history of the world. I don't think there's any doubt about it. That doesn't mean there weren't mistakes made. That doesn't mean that we didn't live up to our principles. The only way our kids have to learn from our history and make this country continue to be the best country is to understand those times we fell short. A very clear, very direct understanding of those events. I will always support that our kids should know about the Tulsa Race Massacre. They absolutely should. There are standards around it. I'm continuing to work to develop even more robust curriculum around these events. I don't want to hide any part of our history. It all needs to be right there, very plain, very direct, so that we can learn from it. So I do think it's very important."
Yeah, I just feel like there's a little. The only part that comes off as vague is like, oh, did we specifically? The only clarification that would need to be made is like, hey, do you think that white supremacy was why we did those things? It's not an immutable characteristic. And if he said like, yeah, we should teach that white supremacy was a factor, then good, we're good. That's all I would really need. So.
Thank you, Sitch. He
I
read
mean,
it.
when
Is that
he
not
says
crystal
that-
clear?
I mean, when he says it to me, it's very clear that he's not trying to hide any aspect of the Tulsa Race Massacre.
Well, it's not a question of hiding a specific actions that take place in the Tulsa Race Massacre. The idea is also putting it into a broader context. If the Tulsa Race Massacre was just about a couple of individuals, then you have no notion.
I think the biggest problem though is that Sam made he made a pretty he asserted pretty strongly that it was racist. He didn't put it into question or something.
That it was actually
or that it would deny your ability to teach different aspects of racism.
About a systemic sort of move to deny an entire section of town of black people power and money. And then if you don't know that the Tulsa Race Massacre was a function of many, many such massacres, where you had politicians assassinated in South Carolina, where you had a black political class driven out, where all of the gains that have been made in Reconstruction in terms of black political power and black wealth, if you just isolate it and do not put it into the greater context, you don't understand what's really actually going on.
But he doesn't deny that you can't put it into that context.
I could go, but
Look,
he is.
Sam, I just want to get your response to what. Look, I just want to get your response to what he said. Does that ring of some sort of white supremacist diatribe? What's it just read? Because to me, it seems crystal clear that he's saying, look, America did not live up to their ideals.
Listen,
America has failed in the past.
I know you want me to concede to see this the way that you see it.
Well, no, I want to see how you see it.
I'm explaining to you exactly. If I look at one interaction during the Tulsa Race Massacre, one individual attacking one other individual, I don't get a full picture of what's going on there.
None of that is in what he said, though.
Excuse me. I'm trying to explain to you what is wrong.
This is going fucking crazy, bro.
But he says it doesn't mean you don't judge the actions of individuals. To look at the Tulsa Race Massacre as actions of individuals, okay, as opposed to as a part of a broader systemic move to deny a class of people, black people, power and money in Oklahoma City. And then to not see that in the context of what was happening in post-Reconstruction America, where you had 6 million members of the KKK, particularly in that decade, where you had the revving up of Jim Crow laws, where you had a series of massacres like this to dispossess black people of political power.
I feel like this would have been more productive if they had mentioned to him what they're going to talk about before they brought him on. You know, I feel like that's the problem here. It's apparently he has no idea what the fuck they're even talking about. You know, and he might just be lying so that he doesn't really have to answer it specifically or something. That's just totally possible. But it would have been good if if he knew going into this what the fuck was going on.
To focus on the individual is to deny what was going on during that entire era. And then to deny what was going on in that entire era is also to deny the larger context of American history. And that is why I compared it to the lost cause, because it is a denial of.
How?
I compared it to the lost cause, because it is a denial.
What the fuck was that? Did he just said like it's a denial? Did he just like bang something intentionally to try to come off as more powerful? Because it doesn't see his the banging doesn't match his like actual energy, so it was just bizarre. What the fuck?
It is a denial of.
Was that on purpose? No, don't do that.
He says specifically though, that's teaching the good, the bad, and the ugly. That we've made mistakes in the past. He says that specifically.
But I'm sorry, the idea of the Oklahoma race massacre being a mistake, as opposed to a literally a campaign.
This is the problem. It's like he's being so unreasonable about it. Like, I mean, again, I think that you could interpret what that other guy had said as maybe not specific enough as if you could teach it. That argument is great. But outside of that, the rest of it just seems like an assumption. Like you're just asserting that he must be as racist as possible. And that's obviously that's maybe not the best argument to make.
That was across many parts of the country.
You don't
dispossess a class of people from political power is like
mistake is not strong enough a word. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, it's not just.
You would classify it as a mistake, though.
In the Oklahoma history guidelines, it says to teach everything you're talking about. It says to teach about the rise of black towns. It says to teach about the rise of the Ku Klux Klan. It says to teach about the emergence of Black Wall Street and the Tulsa race massacre. It says to teach about.
What does it tell that you cannot read me the Oklahoma law?
Which the anti-CRT thing?
Yeah.
It says no teacher or administrator or other employee or school district charter, school or virtual school charter should require to make part of the course the following concepts. Number 1, race or sex is inherently superior to another race or sex. Number 2, that an individual by virtue of his race or sex is inherently racist, sexist, or oppressive, whether consciously or unconsciously. Number 3, an individual is inherently racist, sexist, or oppressive, whether consciously or unconsciously.
See that like that I could be like, oh, that might be a little bit vague.
By virtue of his race or sex is inherently racist, sexist, or oppressive, whether other employer or school district charter, school or virtual school charter should require to make part of the course the following concepts. Number 1, race or sex is inherently superior to another race or sex.
Okay, fair.
Number 2, that an individual by virtue of his race or sex is inherently racist, sexist, or oppressive, whether consciously or unconsciously.
Yeah, so that could be like I don't think that any one person is. I mean, like, well, I do think that like there is a level of inherent racism for like everybody, like well, tribalism, I would call it, right? So like I mean that's just like a whole different conversation though. But you wouldn't centralize that around one group of people, right? You wouldn't just tell like white people that they would be inherently racist and not tell other people that they have the same capacity. Because I think it's like I really do think that like everybody has a level of a race, especially when you're driving, right? So that's like inherently when you're, especially then.
Number 3, an individual should be discriminated against or receive adverse treatment solely or partially because of his or her race or sex. Number 4, members of one race or sex cannot and should not attempt to treat others without respect to race or sex. Number 5, an individual's moral character is necessarily determined by his race or sex. Number 6, an individual by virtue of his race or sex bears responsibility for actions committed in the past by other members of the same race or sex. Number 7, an individual should feel discomfort, guilt, anguish, or any other form.
Would you read that last one for me again?
Any individual by virtue of his or her race or sex bears responsibility for actions committed in the past by other members of the same race or sex.
Do you disagree? Do you disagree with that, Sam?
No. Yeah, I don't think that white people are responsible for solving. So, in all honesty, like I don't think that like white people are responsible for reversing like racism. I think that rich, like people with money are, and that even means like middle class people. Like we should be using our tax dollars to correct these problems, right? Because if you're a wealthy black person, then like yeah, you should help. Deal with a different type, not just racism, but every different type of oppression, regardless of whether it's skin color or gender or sex or anything, or maybe somebody different, any way that people are disenfranchised, right? I would say that in general. So I don't think it's just that. I don't think it's just because you're white you're the only ones that are solely responsible. So
no, I was curious about the wording. I mean, let's be clear. Like in practice, a lot of this wording can be interpreted in a myriad of ways.
Sure,
right?
language is that way. Yeah.
On its face, though, this would all be totally acceptable if it was passed in like the 1960s, right? This would all be like hailed as a civil rights victory in the 1960s.
Yes, at a time prior to the Civil Rights Act, you're probably right. In fact, if it was done during slavery, it would be hailed as a real victory.
Yeah, exactly. Right.
Of course.
Right. Yes, but we're 60 years out from the and there is a resurgence of an attempt to sort of like a neo-Confederate resurgence in this country.
But what is the problem with any of the language that?
Well, I mean, you can continue to read some of the law, but I think like the idea that someone is that to say that white people have unconscious, and I would argue that it's not exclusive to white people. I think that there's
based as fuck. Yeah.
There's a practice of white supremacy amongst black people.
No, tribalism. Like that tribalism might be manifested as white supremacy right now, but it's tribalism. Everybody has a little bit of that racism in them. It's just the truth.
Well, but to say that it is because of our whiteness that we don't have, that we have unconscious biases, or we could have unconscious biases. And I believe under that law, there is a real question as to whether I could say that in a classroom.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think
even that we could have unconscious biases. Right. I think that is, a real problem.
I think the concept of whether people have these unconscious biases, I understand if in a school, in a public school, you say, okay, in history class and things of this nature, we shouldn't be teaching that, people possibly have unconscious biases, which is a contested topic.
Social studies class.
I think that people do have like subconscious biases. I think that, well, it's interesting how you would teach like kids in a high school. That's an interesting conversation because like I do think that people will generally have like kind of an unconscious bias against different people. But how do you teach that? Just be aware of the way that you act and try to treat everybody the same. I think for a young person should be enough. But
I think it's totally fine if parents don't want to teach the idea, this frankly, unproven idea that people have these unconscious biases. I think that's totally fine in a public school.
Oh, mine are conscious as fuck.
And to me, it takes like a very far jump to go from you can't teach that people have unconscious biases to this is the rise of like the neo-Confederacy.
Well, I think passing laws to say that we can't teach that we have unconscious biases is, I think that is.
Well, don't we understand that there are unconscious bias? I remember reading like a study that talked about how every person of like the same group will generally look at other people of a different group that they don't know as like less than to some extent. Like they'll be, but they'll treat people of like their own group better. So like if a white person sees a black person, they're more uncomfortable around them. But once they get to know them, they don't care anymore. That bias goes away. Same thing with like the black person sees a white person, they're more uncomfortable around them until they get to know them, and that bias comes away. But if a white person saw another white person, they're more comfortable around them than they would be around an unfamiliar black person. And same thing with black people, they're more comfortable around an unfamiliar black person than a white person until again they get to know each other, and then that kind of like the bias goes away. So wouldn't that be carded with some kind of subconscious bias?
I don't think it's I don't think it has the exact same implications, but it is the exact same dynamic. It's the same impetus. It's just like, you're not able, it's like when Lee Atwater said with the Southern strategy, we can no longer after the Civil Rights Act, we can no longer use the N-word. So we say busing.
What?
You can't use the N-word, so we say raise taxes.
Sam, do you disagree with the part of the law that states that you can't say that people have immutable characteristics? Because I mean, for me, that is textbook racism, to teach that someone has some kind of behavior specifically because they're a certain race or religion or anything. Seems like
or some kind of different behavior, right? Yeah, I agree with that.
Textbook racism to me, and the law specifically, I think, is against that.
I mean, I don't know which provision of the law you're talking about. I'm sure there's some provisions of that law that I have no issue with, and I would suggest that they're probably in there, as a way of getting the parts that are really problematic. Like I do think it's very problematic.
And that's possible, but
you cannot teach that that you could have unconscious racism. Yeah, well, I think that's
this is why I don't like that. The Oklahoma State, they actually put out some pretty good guidelines where they kind of go over all these various things. And when they talk about the unconscious bias part, they say, this is the example they give is they say it's acceptable to teach that stereotypes and xenophobia do exist and can lead to harmful consequences. But it's not acceptable to teach students that people of a specific race are always racist, regardless of whether they're aware of their racist assumptions and acts because of unconscious bias.
That's different. Well, there's a difference between saying like, oh, people have unconscious bias versus saying people are always racist. Like that's very different to me.
And to me, I understand that that's a part of,
Well,
some ideologies is the fact that we're all kind of operating under these unconscious biases. Personally, I don't think it's helpful or useful to conceptualize this, because the way this basically breaks down is that whenever someone's having an argument about whether something is racist or offensive, the person will basically fall back on, well, you can't see it because of your skin color. This is your unconscious bias.
Yeah, I mean, I get that. It's unproductive, the conversation. If we did have those conversations, we're probably better off, like, I just feel like all these different theories are cool, and they might even be true, but, like, what more important, like, maybe we just focus on giving people more money and shit, Like, I don't know. Like, I don't know. I feel like, not for nothing, I think a lot of racism would go away if people had, like, all had the same, like, financial accessibility. I really do feel like a lot of, like, stereotypes are upheld because of poverty. Like, our ancestors made black people poor, and robbed them of shit, and now, like, it's almost just like that is just keeping stereotypes active, because poor people tend to not act perfectly, right? And so we're like, oh, and some people will be like, oh, it must be immutable, like they'll engage in racism and I'm not understand that. So people will be ignorant to that and think that, like, oh, black people are just inherently bad in some capacity, because so if maybe we just focus on trying to do that, it seems like the best educational method.
And I have no problem with that not being taught in public schools.
Okay, well, I think that is I think that is problematic. I do think that's problematic. The idea that you're unaware of that your position in society can obscure society's dynamics, I think is a really important thing to teach kids.
Well, I don't think it's not saying that you can't say that there's a potential for unconscious bias. It's saying you can't say that that's inherent. You inherently have this unconscious bias.
I think it's more than likely that, inherent, I don't think it means that it is something that you're born with.
That is what inherent means, though. Right? Inherent means, like, you are born with it. It is something that is just so fundamentally part of somebody. Like, yeah, inherent, existing in something as permanent, as essential, or characteristic attribute. Oh, maybe, I mean, I guess that's how you define inherent, but
necessarily as much as you're,
That's what inherent means.
That's
in that you're that it is a what do you call it? A trait that is a function that you are born into, I should say, right? Like you are acculturated as a white person to.
Right, but that wouldn't be inherent to me, right? Like, am I wrong about this? What the fuck?
A certain status in society that. Not necessarily. I mean I suppose you could argue also, statistically speaking, that you're born.
I feel like inherent is the same as immutable, though. Like, it's all the same, no?
Because you're going to be more likely in a better hospital. Your chances of your mother dying during childbirth are less. There's a whole host of things that are predetermined as you're born that can be measured by your skin color. That's just a reality.
I think when we're
I don't know how you even begin to deny that.
I think when we're talking about public schools, that we have to understand that there's a lot of people in this country. The public schools are supposed to be basically something for everyone, and the concept of, like, the unconscious bias and that we're all living in white supremacy and all these things. I mean, that's a contentious topic. It's a very contentious opinion that a lot of people in this country don't even agree with, and I don't see a problem that public schools are not going to teach something that is so politically motivated in one direction in that fashion.
I know you've said that,
and I don't see how that leads to, like, the downfall of our society to some kind of.
I disagree, and because
you think that one concept is to the Confederacy.
What you're saying.
I mean, it might be a good idea to teach these things, but the idea that, like, it's the downfall of our society not to teach those things, that seems a little silly. Yeah, I get that. But what the fuck? Sorry, I'm just getting, like, dumpstered here.
It's misinformation any more than my expressing the opposite opinion is misinformation. You can disagree with my opinion, and people can assess based upon the way that we've argued about it.
If you talked about the Oklahoma law and you said, I disagree with this aspect of
I think the entire...
Let him finish that.
If you talked about the Oklahoma anti-CRT bill and you said, I think that this part of it is wrong, I think you should be able to teach that there's unconscious racism or whatever. That's not misinformation. That's fine. The misinformation element to me, and the problem with it, is that when you misinterpret, whether intentionally or unintentionally, and you only play half of the guy's answer, and you make it sound like, oh, this guy is trying to hide up the Tulsa race massacre, and then you use that to say that Oklahoma is, like, engaged in lost causism, and this is some.
Yeah, I did inherited money from my parents, but I think that that's different. The different. I think inherent and inherit are right. Those are two different words. Are they the same word? Inherent. Oh, I guess they're the same. Is this is this an entire conversation about, like, the word inherent means? Inherited. That's not the same fucking word, dude? Am I getting fucking mind blown by something that everybody knows? Holy fuck. No. No, inherited is different. Inherited.
Inherited.
Inherited. Is this the same thing? Inherited and inherent are different. Inherit. I-N-H-E-R-I-T. Versus inherent. I-N-H-E-R-E-N-T. They're the same. They're a different fucking word, bro. You're trying to gaslight me, bro. You're trying to gaslight me. I'm gonna sue you. Inherit something is different from inherently. Inherited, inherent. These are two fucking words. You're pissing me off. Okay, just fuck off. The terms for inherent, something that is an inherent characteristic, it's intrinsic, right? It's something. I would argue that's immutable, right? Existing in something as a permanent, essential, or characteristic attribute. A characteristic attribute that maybe you can interpret this as some inherent as not something that's very permanent or essential to somebody. So maybe they're just having a semantical argument right now. I don't know.
Kind of white supremacy. I mean, that's just.
I think
that is clearly
the very act of proposing and passing anti-CRT laws is in fact part of a white supremacist project, and one that is akin, obviously we're in a different era, but akin to the lost cause. Yes. I mean, the guy who developed the whole thing, Rufo himself, more or less articulated stuff like that back
He didn't say it was a
on
lost
Twitter.
cause. What do you mean?
No, he didn't say it was a lost cause, but he said, like, we're just going to put out these words and we're going to make it a boogeyman. And it's almost like it is, like I say, eerily reminiscent of Lee Atwater's. We can't say the N-word anymore. But we say these other things that are coded and signify and hit the same buttons. And that's exactly what I think it is.
Sam, before we move past this, I just want to get this clear, because do you think we can fight racism? Like I'm against racism, and I'm an old school liberal. I believe in, trying to get a colorblind society where people are, as Martin Luther King always says, judged by the content of their character, not the color of their skin. But what you're saying with the unconscious bias stuff, it makes me wonder, if that's even a possibility in your estimation.
I mean, I don't.
For me, for colorblindness, I think that it's one of those things where I don't know, and maybe this is just how I feel. It could be just a boomer speak, but I feel like we've almost become more racist in our conversations about race, or maybe it's just because there's been more of a class divide and less money and for black people and stuff, which just keeps perpetuates other stereotypes. But I feel like individually, you should try to be colorblind. You shouldn't be walking around like a fucking grocery store being like, oh, would you like my place in line, sir? That seems like just incredibly, disrespectful and what is the word? Belittling to do something like that. But on a societal level, academically, yeah, we should acknowledge systemic racism.
I don't know if we can ever get to the point where people don't have.
You're against racism? I'm not.
Unconscious biases. I don't know if we can ever get to that. I am more concerned with dealing with the implications of those biases first.
Right. So you do think we should fight racism?
And by passing these, so-called anti-CRT laws for elementary school kids, the whole act, in my mind, is a way to obscure the reality of things like I just described. That it's significantly hotter in, black people's neighborhoods. That the tax code, though it wasn't written necessarily to discriminate against black people, does discriminate against black people because.
Does it?
Because of the relationship between the tax code and having political power.
This is where we completely disagree, because like I said, in the first of the clip, he says we should teach the good, the bad, and the ugly. We have made mistakes as a nation, and we shouldn't try to hide that.
Yeah, again, I think that's vague, but I feel like,
we have, he literally says, we've had times in our past where we haven't lived up to our principles. So in the context of this bill, they're talking about teaching all of the things that you're talking about that we need to teach.
Happening?
So we're not going to look. Obviously we're going to disagree on this. But I think if you watch the context of the first clip, it's crystal clear that he's saying that we need to teach all of these things, and I think it's a mischaracterization to say that he's not.
Like I say,
that he's trying to hide these
I think
things.
His words. We have a disagreement on how to interpret his words. I also think the context in which, in support of the anti-CRT legislation is without a doubt, in my mind, a part of a campaign that is akin. It's not obviously the lost cause, because this is,
Am I or am I not against systemic hot cartoon moms? You know, here's the thing on systemic hot cartoon moms. I'm very much, the problem is I'm okay with not hot cartoon moms. I am okay with it. But I am also not for the removal of systemic hot cartoon moms, because I think that or in just them in general, right? So from a systemic perspective, if they're not a hot mom, it's okay. But I like hot moms, so I would like to have hot moms as cartoon characters, but it's okay if you make one that's not. So I wouldn't call it, I'm not for systemic hot moms, but I am for the existence, because systemic implies to me that you have to be hot. They don't have to be, you know. So that's something that and sometimes maybe you don't want a mom as a character in there, then how is she going to be hot, you know? Sometimes you may not want you may not want it. So
he's not Dunning, and that's not that's not the
what the fuck am I supposed to do
but
here?
It is akin to the same type of project, which is to obscure racism, systemic racism that exists in our society.
The problem I have with this is that, and I sent you a link to the bill if you want to look at it. It's pretty short. That has the concepts that you're not supposed to teach.
It's going to launch.
It's a PDF file. But what I just want to say
Oh,
is that,
we can't be a
it doesn't
PDF
say-
file?
there's
That's
nothing in there
terrible.
that says you can't teach about systemic injustices in society. There's nothing
Well,
in there.
what
that
is
says you can't teach
CRT?
about- Well, hold on a second. The bill doesn't even say you can't teach CRT either. It says you can't teach these specific concepts. And when we were going through those specific concepts, you seem to be fine with all of them, with the exception of the unconscious racist concept. And so that's why it's hard for me to draw the kind of extreme conclusions you're drawing from it.
All right, let me. I mean.
Stop sending him links, Sitch. Jeez, let's move on, because
we could have had a more profitable conversation if you just sent me this stuff in advance, but that's fine. But
That part is true. He is right about that. Definitely right about that. What the hell's a barrel launcher? What the frinkus?
you want me to read
Look,
this?
we did no, Sitch. Stop sending Sam links. Sam, we want you to focus. He's trying to make an argument here.
Well, here's the thing, because there's another part of this argument I want to talk about, but it's just going to repeat itself because of this disconnect about what these CRT laws mean, essentially. Because the other part of the conversation that I want to talk about, which is that I think that there's
Okay, wait a second. Hold on. One part you didn't read. This is G of that law.
Why did you send him the links?
No teacher. Well, because he's trying to make an argument that I am misinforming people, and so it would be.
Well, I started to read
Well,
that.
we have like 15. We have like 15 minutes. Now we're going to read the whole bill.
No teacher, administrator, or other employee of a school district, charter school, et cetera, shall require or make part of a course the following concepts: that any individual, and it doesn't even it actually is like just poor English here. Any individual,
yeah,
should feel discomfort, guilt, anguish, or any other form of psychological distress on account of his or her race or sex. And it's not clear that they're teaching that someone is obligated to feel this.
What the fuck?
Psychological distress on account of should feel discomfort. Poor English here. Any individual,
yeah,
should feel discomfort, guilt, anguish, or any other form of psychological distress on account of his or her race or sex.
What?
Is obligated.
I think that they're just saying that you shouldn't teach something that would make somebody feel guilty and fundamentally, right? So, I mean, maybe that's ambiguous. I don't know, man. It doesn't seem that. I think they're just saying don't blame white people don't make it like all white people are bad for the badness of some white. I think that's how it's supposed to be interpreted. I guess I don't think that can be loosely interpreted, can it?
To feel this. The way this is written, frankly, and I say this as somebody who was raised by a contracts lawyer, is that should one feel discomfort, guilt, anguish, or any other form of psychological distress on account of his or her race or sex is not necessarily something that's controlled by the teacher.
Well, no, it is. It says
Oh,
should.
is it?
It says should.
I mean, do you think it's ambiguous? I mean, I guess maybe. I feel like if the argument is, hey, I think this is really vague and this could be interpreted in a way where we couldn't really teach anything about racism too much if it would make a white kid uncomfortable. I mean, maybe. I don't know if I agree with that, but if that's Sam's argument, then I guess that's something. but okay.
That's what should means.
That any individual should feel
Yeah.
discomfort. But how do you should feel discomfort?
It's saying a teacher cannot teach that
What?
students should feel. Okay.
Say to me in a sentence, you should feel discomfort.
You just said it, Sam.
No.
You should feel discomfort.
Meritocracy.
You should feel uncomfortable about this, Sam.
This is like a way in which someone who comes in and says,
I just did what you said.
Okay, I understand.
Right.
This is a way for
The hell sound like?
for a parent who doesn't like the idea of their child to be taught that white people attacked black people. And
I mean, maybe if his argument is it's very vague, and again, it could be used as like a lawsuit that would rob resources. That like, okay, I get that. I suppose.
specifically to disempower them.
Do you
They
think
feel
that teachers
discomfort.
should be able to teach that because your kid is white, they should feel bad about white?
Do
racism in
you
the
think
past?
under this law, a teacher could teach something that would make someone feel discomfort, guilt,
Of
or
course.
anguish?
Of
You
course.
think they can under this
Yeah.
law?
Okay, I think I might potentially understand where Sam's coming from here. That kind of makes sense. Like if he's saying that they could give a teacher like the grounds to have a complaint just because their kids feels uncomfortable, even if it's not explicitly meant to. Like maybe that's what he's talking about. I guess I don't know if that's okay.
I think that is not the way this is going to
So
go
I
down.
sent you another link.
I know, Sitch. What are
Which
you
is
doing
wait,
here?
stop, Adams, please stop. Okay, I sent you the Oklahoma
Getting
State
so
School Board
mad.
Association guideline,
They should have had this. They should have talked about this beforehand to plan this.
and they talk about this, and they literally say they talk about this. If you want to look on it, it's on page 4, right at the top. They talk about this specific part of the CRT bill, and they say teachers cannot teach that students should feel discomfort, guilt, or anguish because of their race. And then right under it, it says acceptable teaching about the facts of history, sociology, etc., even if students have certain feelings about what they are learning. This is not within a teacher's control, nor is prohibited by this part of the statute. The prohibition is of teachers informing students that they should
Okay.
feel distress because of their race or sex. So to me, it's very clear that what this law is saying is that a teacher should not tell a student that because they're white, they should feel a certain way. It doesn't say that you can't teach about racism, you can't show your kid roots, and if they feel weird or bad about it, that means that it's illegal.
I mean, I think that in practice, this law will inhibit people from teaching these things. I mean, we've seen it time and time again. That's why
Have we?
you
On
could
this?
go. We have seen it in the context, certainly within the context of Florida. And we see it like the way that it works when you're talking about like library books being pulled. The law doesn't call for these library books to be pulled, but they do so because there is a strong incentive to err on the side of not bringing these things up. There's no teacher who's going to want to go into a classroom and run afoul of these laws, and so they're going to stay way clear of it. And that
the
is the
teachers have to.
purpose.
They have to.
That is the purpose of these bills. I mean, it is the purpose of these bills, because the idea that there was rampant teaching of stuff, where elementary school kids were being told in Oklahoma schools that they are, should be feeling guilty because of the that the white kids should be feeling guilty for the Oklahoma massacres. It's just not there. It's the same way that when Oklahoma, or I don't know if it was Oklahoma or Nebraska, passing anti-Sharia laws. I mean, back in the aughts.
Well,
It's
okay,
a similar dynamic.
There's two issues. The first is that even in Oklahoma and even in Florida, the standards say that they have to teach about slavery. They have to teach about all these other things by law. So it's not like the teachers can avoid to talk about these subjects the way that you're afraid they will be. That's number one. And
They
then
might be able to.
number two,
Well,
you
you can- I mean,
you bring up
like,
what you bring
am I
up the
teaching-
you bring
Just
up the
let him
books
finish,
thing.
Sam.
Hold on.
Let him
You
finish.
bring up the books thing, and that to me, the books thing actually proves my point, because you have all these parents complaining about books and all this other stuff, and yet these CRT bills have been on the books for a year or 2 years in some states, and we haven't heard any curriculum, any evidence of parents going in and complaining about the teachings of slavery or any of that effect. It hasn't happened to my knowledge.
I am not.
I mean,
off
it would
the
be a
top
big
of my
story.
head,
I would assume
can't.
you would have heard about it because you'd want to report about
I
it
mean,
and say,
to be
we got
honest-
him. We got DeSantis.
To be honest with you, I don't even remember the video you're talking about. I mean, so I can't say off the top of my head. We've been having a conversation for an hour about a video that I have no recollection about. So
Yeah, but
it's quite
that to me is
possible
even
that
that's
story.
part of the problem. I mean,
Well, I mean, like you could have let him know what he was talking about. Like that, maybe that is problematic. But why not be like, hey, we're gonna talk about this. Be a little prepped for it. That was kind of your fault for not really preparing him for that.
because the other
That I
thing,
do too much content.
well, no, the part of the problem is that when you're looking at these, as you said, we've been having an hour-long conversation about trying to interpret someone's words and interpret these laws, and that whether it can be interpreted in multiple ways and whether it's really that bad. And to me, when you label these things like establishing the Neo-Confederacy or lost causism, or in another video you talked about how these are the incremental steps to fascism, and you use this like very strong language for these sorts of things. I mean, you're basically, in my mind, you're setting up people to view this like they need to use violent solutions to solve these kinds of problems.
I've never, ever suggested that people.
No, I know that you haven't directly suggested that, but I'm saying that by
that might be a little bit
using
of
this
a reach.
language, you're basically
wait a
painting
second.
this picture
You're
in
telling me
people's minds.
that you've just spent an hour on one video that I did. I don't know how many months ago, or was it a year ago, or whenever.
This was a couple weeks ago.
And this was a couple of weeks ago.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, so you're telling me you just spent an hour taking issue with my interpretation of this guy advocating for this law, with the idea that what happened in the Oklahoma race massacre was a question of bad actions by individuals, and you're telling me that that is misinformation. But you're saying that because I say these are, and I've said this, I think quite often, that I don't know if this is fascism as much as it is steps that are necessary, incremental steps towards fascism, that I'm inciting violence?
I said so, and you even said this. I don't know when you upload your show versus when you do it. You had clips just like the day before yesterday, where you were talking about the anti-CRT laws in Florida being incremental steps to fascism. And as you said, you said this several times. This is a repeated theme of your show. And I'm saying that this is,
and so you're interpreting that as a call to violence?
No, I'm not interpreting you as saying this is a call to violence. What I'm saying is that if you
I thought
paint
that's what
this
you just
picture,
said.
no, I'm saying if you paint this picture in your audience's mind that we're teetering on the edge of fascism, okay? If you were telling me, Sitch, we're teetering on the edge of white supremacy and fascism, okay? I think it's reasonable that a reasonable person hearing that and believing that would say, I need to use violence to prevent my country from going to fascism.
I mean, I don't know if I go that far, but I think it's reasonable to say that, hey, that might be very sensationalized and it might just rile people up. So maybe.
You're kind of setting people up.
I don't know who you're hanging out with, but no, I don't see how would violence.
Wait, if I told you,
in
if
any
you
way
believed that the country was teetering on fascism, you don't think it would be justified to use violence to prevent that?
I don't think it would be effective. I don't think
Why?
one individual perpetrating
Well, I said justified,
violence.
not effective. I said justified.
Well, I wouldn't advocate it. No, and
I know. I'm saying,
like,
do you
what are
think it would
talking
be
about?
justified for if someone thinks, or
No.
actually, I shouldn't say justified. Do you think it'd be reasonable? Do you think it'd be reasonable that a reasonable person
No.
would try to use violence to stop their country from?
No, I don't
slipping
think it'd be
into
reasonable
fascism?
because I can't
Okay,
possibly think of
sure.
like how an individual's act of violence is going to stop fascism.
Yeah, but here's
How would that happen?
I know that you don't, but other people do.
Well, but you're saying reasonable, and you explain to me how that would happen. If it's a reasonable concept, it's easy for you to explain to me.
Yeah, because if someone says, "Okay, my country is literally teetering on fascism,"
And so
I'm
what are you
trying
going
to
do
vote.
reasonable?
I'm trying
What's
to
your
vote.
What's your
I'm trying to
reasonable
explain it to you.
action that you're going to take?
I'm trying to explain it to you. If someone says my country's teetering on fascism and white supremacy, and I'm going out there and I'm voting, and it's not making a difference, okay, I need to go out with my friends. We need to organize some kind of violent resistance underground movement, or we're going to get guns. We're going to go after people. We're going to start blowing up buildings. We're going
Who
to
are you
fight
going to
against
blow
the
up
fascists.
and go after?
They could go after the governor. They could go after the state legislatures. What do you mean? They start burning
So
down these
you
buildings.
think it's
They
a
could start kidnapping these
reasonable-
people.
wait a second.
I mean,
You're
there's
telling
literally
me-
remember there's a
okay.
plot
One
to
at a
kidnap the
time,
governor
guys.
like
One
not
at a
that
time.
long ago.
Let me just be clear. You think it's a reasonable action for people to fight fascism by assassinating a governor of the state of Oklahoma or something?
Well, I think that it's not whether it's reasonable or not. I mean, if it actually was fascism, maybe. I mean, that's the thing. It's like, do you think that might be disproportionate? I mean, isn't fascism like Nazi Germany? Like, wouldn't that, like... Yeah, I mean, like, yeah, I think violence, if it was actually that, sure. So, like, when you use it hyperbolic language, maybe that communication is poo-poos.
Do you think it would have been reasonable for people to assassinate Hitler before he rose to power?
I don't know how you would anticipate that he was going to do that.
You could read Mein Kampf in his prison cell. When he wrote in his prison cell about how if you're Jewish in Germany and Hitler's rising to power and you read Mein Kampf, you'd be like, holy shit, I got to get this guy out of power.
In retrospect,
I'm not even in retrospect, preemptively.
Well, I obviously I don't think anybody even contemplated doing that before he rose to power. I mean,
I don't think
know
they
what your
expected
standard
him to rise to power. But I'm saying now, especially
Okay,
now with that
that's my
context.
point.
Yeah, but now it's even worse because now you have the context of Hitler. Now you have the context of fascism, which is why you're kind of invoking fascism in this conversation when we talk about these topics.
No. I don't know what to tell you. I mean, if you think it's reasonable for someone to go out and that it's a reasonable concept for people to
I think a
organize-
reasonable person could come to that conclusion that it's reasonable to fight.
Well, not even that. Maybe a reasonable person would think that, like, if something was actually fascist, that they would fight against it. But, like, yeah, I mean, I could see a somewhat unreasonable person think that, right?
I disagree.
So you think all the Antifa people are crazy and unreasonable?
I don't think the Antifa people are going out and trying to assassinate anybody.
No, but they believe that they are justified in using violence to stop fascism. They definitely.
Well, I think they
100%.
literally go out and try and defend, put themselves between people for the most part. my understanding of what Antifa does
That's
is
cool.
they get in between fascists and the people that fascists are attacking. That's different than going out and assassinating political figures. There's never been anything remotely like that, as far as I'm aware of.
Well, first of all, there was the Gavin Long situation where he literally was listening to Jimmy Dore and other people like that, talk about how we live in this white supremacy society, and it definitely motivated him pretty directly to go out and start assassinating police officers. Okay, so that did happen. This isn't like something that's never happened before. Number one, and number two, the reason I'm surprised to hear you say this is because
you want me to defend Jimmy Dore?
No, I don't want to defend Jimmy Dore. But I'm just saying that there's a track record for something like this happening. But number two, you literally
I don't
the other
use
day
the same rhetoric as Jimmy Dore does. I think people are
when you talk about incremental steps of fascism, I mean, you literally had the other day someone call into your show and say, Sam, I listened to your show a lot, and I feel like it's time for the left to start advocating for violence. That happened on your show like 2 days ago.
He's reacting to the news, and I specifically said, don't do that.
You said, well, first of all, it's a very weird conversation because you said let me bring up exactly what you said.
And we should be clear, I have open phone lines. So this is not somebody I invited to call.
No, I understand that.
Okay.
Well, their point obviously is this, that like the rhetoric that you use is being interpreted, could be interpreted to advocate violence, when the reality is it's probably more along the lines of like, this is, it sounds like maybe Sam is just kind of another, media, like sensationalized media personality.
Said that the first thing you said was that you would never critique the sense of frustration, desire, or compulsion that there needs to be some type of violent response, which that's not exactly what I would say. But then after it, you did say that you practically didn't think violence would bring about change in a positive way. But you didn't really talk about like a moral condemnation of it. You didn't call the man crazy or unreasonable or anything of that nature. You just said, well, I don't think it'll work practically.
I agree. I don't think it would work practically. I don't think a reasonable person would.
But morally, you don't have a problem with it?
No, I don't find it, like, my morality is just not something that I necessarily talk about. I don't have.
Well, that's just not true. What are you talking about? What? That, like, come on, man. Like, that's just stupid. Like, he absolutely, every day you're having a discussion about your morality when it comes to conversations about like systemic racism and shit, which isn't a bad thing. But then to say like, well, I don't really talk about my morality. That's just like I feel like that's a dishonest thing to say.
To justify my morality to you. You're talking about me advocating violence, and I'm not. You just quoted
I didn't say
me
you
saying,
advocated
don't
violence.
do it.
I never
and
said,
I don't think a reasonable person would.
I never said you advocate for violence. What I said is that your rhetoric can lead people down this path, and you had someone who literally called into your show who said, I listen to your show a lot, and I feel like we're getting there.
It's not my rhetoric. It is the reality of what we're dealing with in this country.
So when you talk about, well, wait a minute. You say the reality of what we're dealing with. It's your perception of reality is that we're going on this path to white supremacy and fascism.
Let me preface
and you talk
by saying
about
this. I should have said this when I came on.
Repeatedly, and
when
someone
I
calls
talk
into your
about
show
things,
and
I'm
says,
doing it
this is
from my
how I
perspective.
feel about things.
One at a time, guys.
What were you gonna say?
One of you can talk. Go ahead.
Okay.
Well,
Sam,
I mean, yes. When I'm talking, just as I assume that you are talking about your perception, and I'm talking about my perception.
Right.
And yes, we disagree. You see what's going on. You don't see a problem. I would see what's going on over the course of the past 20 years, and a rise in attacks on marginal people. We just had a guy got knifed to death in Brooklyn the other night because he was gay. I see this resurgence of homophobia. I see this resurgence of transphobia. I see this backlash against CRT, a thing that vast majority of people who want to get rid of it can't even define.
Oh my God.
They think that it's associated with, in some way, black people being emancipated. I see right-wing pundits who are making a ton of cash off of attacking trans people and gay
That's
people,
true.
some of the most marginalized people in our society. And yes, I find it alarming, and I find it a step towards fascism. I think what DeSantis is doing with his relentless talk of woke ideology, which is a sort of like this blanket term, which in my estimation, again, my perception, my opinion, if people think this is misinformation, I think they have a blinkered notion of what misinformation is, but that is all coded language that is supposed to basically play on racism, which is endemic in this country. And it has been endemic in this country for, arguably maybe endemic in this country since its founding. And at different times, it can be exacerbated, in part because of the economic situation, in part because of the demographic situation, And yeah, I think that we are taking incremental steps towards fascism. I do not think a reasonable person can hear me say that and think I need to go assassinate a governor. I mean, I don't know what to tell you. That's my opinion. It's my perception.
So, well, this is, I mean, I feel like you're kind of making my point, is that when you frame, you know, all these things in society is basically leading us down this pathway to the destruction of our society, to living into.
Well, I didn't say the destruction of our society.
Well, destruction of democracy, I guess, because you're talking about we're going to live under a fascistic rule. I do think it would be reasonable that a reasonable person would want to prevent us from living in a fascistic rule if they believe and interpret it the way that you're kind of laying it out. And
well, I think it's reasonable for people not to want the country to be fascist, but that doesn't mean it's reasonable for them to think that assassinating a governor is going to inhibit that.
It's interesting because not only did you have this guy call in and literally.
No, I didn't have the guy.
Okay, I'm sorry. A guy called into your show. Okay.
Yes.
You had a guy call into your show, and he was saying that he thinks the left should start advocating for violence, and he was saying that he thought revolutions were only successful with violence. And after that guy said that, you read a message. You had, I don't know how you have some sort of like messages come in, and you read it out, and I don't think you knew what the guy meant, because the message said, hey, caller, you should read Nelson Mandela's speech that he gave as a closing statement to his trial. Do you know what speech he's talking about?
Tell us. No, I'm not familiar. No.
So the speech that the message that you read was talking about is it's called the "I'm prepared to die" speech, and it's Nelson Mandela.
Jesus Christ, that's interesting. Okay.
Mandela talking exactly about how his movement tried to use nonviolence to fight oppression and to get the political change they want, and it didn't work. So now him and his movement is completely morally justified to use violence to get what they want.
I don't think that we have come anywhere close as a society to exhausting civil disobedience. I don't even think we've come.
I'm glad. I'm very glad that you say that. But you have people calling your show who don't think that way, obviously.
Yes, but I would not in any.
Well, I mean, if he did say don't do that, I mean that seems like I mean, I don't know. I understand what he's saying. You know, it is interesting that conservatives are more like empathetic to Russia, which, you know, I believe you could argue. I mean, definitely very oppressive. Would you argue it's fascist? I mean, they've had the same president. I don't know. Forever. He must be a good president. But they're more empathetic to Russia and against gay people. So, like, yeah, they're more empathetic to Russia and the ideals there than they are to, like, leftists. You know what I mean? So, like, we might be heading in that direction. I could see people saying that. Where you have, like, a party of fucking people who are more interested in, like, supporting our enemy of Russia, who is antithetical to what we believe, than, like, other leftists. So, like, yeah, maybe you could argue a little bit, but I don't think that we're, like, close to, like, you know, violence. I would say, like, economically, though, we're getting pretty, you know, a little fucked. I wouldn't be surprised if people start, like, you know, stealing more and more. You know, I mean, you're seeing it more, especially at Walmart, and I mean, like, some of that's probably because, you know, they don't really feel like they have the money to do shit, especially since, pretty sure, like, Walmart, like, has, like, heavy subsidies, just like welfare subsidies. Like, the people that work there are, like, on welfare, which is basically Walmart using welfare as a subsidy for their shit. So,
look at your comment section here on YouTube. Pick one out and hold you responsible for a comment section specifically based upon the idea that you're saying, like, I disagree that the country is going fascist, therefore a reasonable person would go out and assassinate an Antifa person or something like that. You know, I don't know what to tell you. You're
right.
You know, well, you're really interested in claiming that, despite the fact that I specifically said to this individual, I don't think that violence is the answer, and despite the fact that I have said very often on the show. And just the idea that, I mean, it's not just me saying this about, there are academics who believe that we are on the verge of fascism, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, this is not a wild-eyed, fantastical idea. I've been doing this for 20 years, and it's only until recently, I think, that, like, there is a burgeoning fascist element to this country. And I don't think that a reasonable person would interpret what I've just said on your show, that they should go out and assassinate people. I don't know what to tell you. You keep repeating the same point over and over again, but I'm not going to change my opinion.
Let me just say, I guess, two things to kind of to conclude this, though you can respond, obviously. The first is that, you know, if you were in that video that you uploaded, if you were kind of condemning violence as strongly to the caller and to your audience as you are right here, I would feel very different about this. I just felt you seemed, and people can watch for themselves, I don't know why, you seemed very uncomfortable to take a very strong stance against violence, which now you don't. You seem very, you know, adamant about it, which I appreciate.
Listen, when somebody calls into the show, we get people call into the show, okay? And when someone is expressing, like, I have when someone calls in like that, it is you don't know who this person is. You don't know what their mental state is. You don't know what's going on there. And so I try and be sensitive to who's there and what's going to be the best way, particularly when someone's starting to express something like those views, the best way to try and sort of unwind them. Okay. And
that's fair. Yeah, I mean, that makes sense. Maybe if they're saying like shit like that, maybe they're a little unhinged. So, and they also might be the kind of person looking for people saying things that they can interpret as what they want to hear. Right, if that makes sense. So, he might look at Sam and be like, oh, I'm going to interpret some of the things that you've said. Like, wasn't there somebody who fucking, like, I don't know, shot someone at a baseball game because of Bernie Sanders? But, like, I wouldn't say that it was Bernie Sanders who was responsible for that. Right.
It was a while ago, there's not many shows that take unscreened phone calls. And there's not many shows that take unscreened IMs. I don't know if there are any.
But you're not a psychologist. You're not just talking to this guy. You're talking to
I know I'm not a psychologist.
Right.
Exactly.
So that's what I mean.
Well, just because you're not a psychologist doesn't mean that you can't be sensitive to, like, the way that you talk to people. Like, that'd be like saying, like, oh, somebody with a disability. Oh, I'm not a psychologist. I'm just going to, like, I'm not going to understand that they might be going through something different like the rest of us,
I'm not. And to me, I'm not a psychologist. And so I'm just doing, in that moment, what I think is the most responsible thing I can do to make sure that that person's bad ideas don't grow and fester. And so if you think that I didn't respond with the proper sort of like emotion or whatever it is, to this call, I don't know what to tell you. Don't watch the show.
Okay. Well, I'm glad you said that you wouldn't pick out a comment from our comment section and paint our show with it, which I appreciate because we do have crazy people kind of talk to everyone and comment on their show. So I mean, but do you think it's just interesting that you said that because that caused so much of a controversy for Emma when she did that to Tim Pool. I mean, she picked out that one guy, the shooter, and said that was indicative of Tim Pool's audience. I mean, do you think that was an unfair characterization for her to make?
I mean, to be totally honest with you, I wasn't terribly familiar with that guy who had. I wasn't terribly familiar with that guy who had.
All of a sudden, I'm thirsty.
Had watched like a white.
He has screenshots of a Temple video.
Yeah, I mean, I wasn't terribly familiar with that with that whole case. Do I think that's indicative of? I think that like if you platform,
I think that if some people are enacting violence on your behalf, like it's something to question, at the very least,
Generically speaking, okay, to be fair, because I don't know necessarily the details of that Tim Pool. But I think that if you platform, and I know that Tim in the past is at least the platform people that I would consider that way. I think he has Jack Posobiec, co-hosting his shows or something. But if you platform these people without critiquing them in any way, I do think you deserve some responsibility for the message that they're putting out. You're giving them credibility. I think. I mean, I think it's okay to have people you disagree with on, and I think it's okay to have like you can put on horrible people on your show, but I think that you as a host set some type of tone, like you're arguing, right? That I should have been harsher with this guy who called in to saying that he is sort of fantasizing about violence or whatever it was specifically he said. But I do think you have a responsibility in that moment to signal to your audience that these ideas and this person who espouses these ideas are wrong. I mean, I think that's. I mean, today, we had Ryan Grimm on, who I quite like both personally and I think he's a great journalist. But he came on a week ago, and there was a couple of things that he had cited that it took a while for me to figure it out with the help of people on Twitter that were misstatements that I think are really unhelpful. And I made a point of correcting that today because
Gavin Long watched Jimmy Dore, not Emma. Okay, I mean, I
do think that there is a responsibility, and so yes, I think that. I mean, I don't know about the specifics of Tim's case, but I do think that yes, if you have fascists or white supremacists on, or bad people in general on, however you define them, then I think you have a responsibility to push back on that, so that you are signaling to people, these are bad ideas.
Yeah, no, I mean, I agree completely. That's why I felt like you weren't pushing back strong enough against the caller. That was my whole point.
Yes,
I agree. You have to push back against these things.
I mean, I think I push back against him, but I can see that you didn't feel
we're approaching an hour and 15 minutes.
Yeah, totally.
If you have to go.
I do.
Okay.
I have one question before we leave,
before you ask that question, I want to thank you for coming on. You definitely lasted significantly longer than Jimmy Dore, who ran after the second question. But
Well,
Okay.
like I say, I'm not. Jimmy and I have a bit of a disagreement on just about everything.
Well, that was my question. When is the Jimmy Dore debate? I saw you giving him a hard time on Twitter, Sam. What happened there?
I don't know if you know the history of Jimmy and I don't have too much time to go into it. But in 2016, when he was on the Young Turks, he did an episode of a show. I can't remember what they called it. It wasn't the Young Turks. It was some other show that he was doing with some other Young Turks people. And he said, there's nothing wrong with Peter Thiel on the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court does a joke, and the Democrats will be able to filibuster just like the Republicans did. And I sent him an email the night before, and I said, I saw the clip, and I said, hey, I'm gonna talk about this clip because I think you're wrong on about 5 different things here. And if you want to come on and talk about it, let's come on. Because I wasn't friends with Jimmy, but it's a courtesy in my mind.
Sure.
And he said, no, go to town. He's too busy. And I start to do it, and he calls into the show. We have open lines, and he called in. And so we began a debate where he clearly didn't know what a filibuster was. He did not know why the Republicans were able not to give Merrick Garland a hearing and assumed that the Democrats could do it. He was giving, in my mind, Democrats too much credit for being able to stop a potential Trump Supreme Court pick. I said, what happens if we get 3 Supreme Court nominees? And he said something to the effect of like, what happens if the moon falls in Lake Michigan? I mean, the guy was wrong about everything. And I specifically remember Michael Brooks, who was far more generous person than I am towards people, IMing me saying, don't go for the neck on Jimmy. And I didn't. I mean, I tried to, within, with certain constraints, not go after him too hard. Although what he was saying was complete gibberish, nonsense, ridiculousness, stupidity. And he said, let's have you come back on my show. We'll talk about it. And then he ghosted me after that.
Wow.
So I do not think that Jimmy's interested in debating me. It's been 7 years, I think, since then. So.
Well, I still swear to Sitch that Jimmy's going to come back on the show, but Sitch doesn't seem to think so. So
I don't.
Sitch did go for the jugular.
Open a bottle of scotch and see if that attracts him.
There you go.
Oh, okay. Well,
that sounds a little mean. Okay.
Well, good idea. We can try that.
Well, thank you for coming on, Sam. You've been very generous with your time.
Yes, thank you.
Thanks for having me, guys. Happy to do this again, and again, it will be. I think we would.
We'll definitely take you up on that, Sam, and we will give you notes and all the links ahead of time. So
that would have been a lot better if it was a little more organized.
I do we're talking about like the last second. So
I've been there. I've been there.
So we didn't we tried to be respectful of your time, so we didn't know if you wanted to see a bunch of links, but we'll do this again. Thanks a lot for coming on.
All right, appreciate you having me.
Take care.
Thanks.
Okay. I always say it's an interesting video. Got a little fucking crazy towards the end there.